Namaskar. Friends, this session was supposed to be, in this session, Mrs. Namita Gokhale, the prominent author and a producer and a director of Jaipur Literature Festival, was supposed to be here. Unfortunately, she could not make it, but the presence of Madam Shubha Sarma, an acclaimed writer of two books, one novel and one short story collection, will fill the void, I am sure. As you all are aware that Shubha Sarma ji is a prominent writer. She belongs to Lucknow. Besides being a writer, she is a yoga practitioner. She enjoys traveling, swimming, and tending her bonsai collection. Her first short story collection is The Fly on the Wall and Other Stories, was launched in 2013 and translated into Hindi, Hebrew and Italian. And it's a good news that the Odia translation is on the way. Very shortly, I think that will come see the light of the day. Her books are always attracted to the readers as well as the critics also. In those books, she displays the strong characters and reflect the changing time that we all confront. Her work has been published in anthologies, magazines, and periodicals, and she has also presented her ideas in various literary events and in webinars. And her most famous novel, The Awasthis of Amnagri, is her second book and the first foray into novel writing. I am not going into detail of that books. You will find those books here to read. And with us, we are now discussing about Namita Gokhale's book, Things to Leave Behind, which has been translated into Oriya very fluently and very ably she has translated. Is our one of the finest poets, short story writer, and a translator, Chirashree Indrasingh. Chirashree is not a casual translator. She takes her own time, plays with the words, emotions, and take a lot of time. And she has every right or reason to up the blood of the publisher. She takes so much time that a publisher becomes impatient. Even if the book which she translated, was published after it got the Sahitya Akademi Award, 1 year after the Sahitya Akademi Award. But I am sure if you read that book, you will feel that it is really worthy of it. Chirashree, since she has translated this book, I just want to ask her first question, that why she wanted to translate this particular novel, which was based on the backdrop of Nainital.
Good morning, namaskar. I enjoyed the whole work of translating this book. When the question is, why did you decide to translate this novel? The answer is obvious, because I loved the book, because I liked the book. That's why I decided to translate the book. translation is always a challenge. Translating phrases, words, events, incidents, and putting them on your own land, it is very difficult. It is very challenging. Anyway, this is not a very simple novel. The story covers 50 years of time, but it begins in the Puranic days when Lord Shiva is moving around the world carrying the body of his beloved. And it ends with, there are so many deaths in the novel. Death of Abhadridatu Prati, death of an old woman in a stormy night, death of Kaumudi, death of Vaidyaji. So there are so many deaths. But the story towards the end, very beautifully the writer describes the birth of the twin rainbow. The two twins are twins, the birth of twins. It symbolizes so many things for me. After reading the book, actually that was the pandemic time. I had a lot of time at my disposal. Classes were taken on alternative days. That's why I read the book for so many times, and after reading, completing the novel, every time I explored something new. A new horizon was opening before me. So I decided to translate because I wanted the pleasure I got from reading that book must be extended to my own people, to my own language, to my students, to my neighbors, to the people whom I love. That's why I decided to translate that novel into Odia.
Now, Madam Shubha Sarma, this book was set on the historical backdrop because it started just 1 year before the Sipahi mutiny in 1856. And it's set in the years between 1840 to 1912. It is a kind of a chronicling the mixed legacy of a British Indian past and the emergence of a fragile modernity. Can you term things to leave behind as a historic novel? And there is a growing genre of historical fiction. Do you agree?
Thank you. It was a pleasure reading the book, Things to Leave Behind, and as Indraji mentioned, it's an extremely engrossing book. Whether it is a historical novel or not, on the surface of it, yes, it is a historical novel because it belongs to a past which none of us have witnessed. Its events are drawn from history. It's a good mix of fiction and facts. But beyond that, I would think that it is a novel about human beings and human relationships. And therefore, you can take it out of that setting and put it in any other place. And it would still be a very, very interesting story. So that is where I find the beauty of it, that it is not entirely something which is from the old dusty past, which you can't relate to. There are many things which apply even in the year 2022. So many emotions, feelings, reactions which belong to the present. And yet they fit so beautifully in the setting of the past. So yes, it is a historical novel, but at the same time, I would term it as an extremely contemporary work of literature. On the genre of historical novel writing, I think in the last few years, it has really picked up. There is definitely an increase in readership and which is evident in the number of bestsellers which come out, which have their roots in ancient India or in a certain period. So there was always this genre of writing relating to the past, but it has picked up in recent years more in terms of moving from the realm of research and scholarship to also fiction and reading for pleasure of reading.
Thank you, ma'am. Mythology has already been dovetailed in the narrative of Indian storytelling from the time immemorial. Here in this novel, birth of Nainital, that Naini lake, is said to be goddess Sati's eye was fallen here, and the lake is made Naini, that is eyes, and Tal means lake. What is your take on Indian myths being used by authors in their novels nowadays?
Like the historical genre, I would say that there has been a real spurt in writing based or being inspired by mythology, whether it is Amish Tripathi's entire series or Koral Das Gupta writing about the Panch Satis. There is a great amount of writing being done which has a direct relationship with mythology. In this book itself, when you start reading it, it begins from the reference that you mentioned about the creation of the Naini lake. This is a piece of Indian culture which all of us have grown up with, and we have all heard about the various locations and the Shakti Peeths. There are quite a few of them in Odisha. And yet the author presents it in such an interesting manner that you don't mind reading it again. You know it, but you don't mind reading it. You enjoy reading it again. So I think that the very difficult task of somebody who writes something which comes from mythology is how to make it interesting for the reader. So all of us already know most of the mythological tales, or most of us have read them at some point, whether as school textbooks or whether as Amar Chitra Katha, or heard them from our family members, grandparents. But yet, why should you want to buy a book which tells you the same story again? That is where I think the craft of the author comes in. And one of the finest examples which comes to my mind is reading The Palace of Illusions by Chitra Banerjee Divakaruni. I read it in my college days, and I can go back and read that book any number of times, because the way she has presented a tale, which all of us know, the Mahabharata and the various characters, they are all so well known and so familiar, and you know where the book is going to end, yet you can't stop yourself from turning the pages and from reading the book, which is, I think, an extremely brilliant piece of authorship. And that is where it is difficult, and yet that is where the talent of the author lies, to make it so interesting for the reader.
Madam, you yourself has also written one novel, the only one novel till now. That is also written in the backdrop of historical facts. So could you just throw some light how you thought of writing a historical novel?
I don't know if I'll call it historical, if you term me as historical, then yes, it is historical, but it is set in the 70s or 80s, which is not very, very far back. And even this book, I found, though the setting is the 19th century and the Indian War of Independence is the backdrop, I find that perhaps a lot of it is autobiographical, or some references Namita ji must have picked up. There are some characters which, the way she has put them together, she has to have personally known them. They could not be only fictional accounts. So as authors, I think all of us draw upon our surroundings, the people we meet, the people we interact with, whether they are in our family or in our circle of friends or in our professional workspace. So we draw upon our experiences with them and we put them together. In my case, when I wrote the Awasthis of Amnagri, it is set in a fictional land of mangoes or Am. So the city of mangoes or the town of mangoes, which is very much in the UP, central UP belt of Malihabad or Lucknow or Unnao, where you have mango orchards. And some parts are definitely parts of life that I have seen, I have witnessed, people that I have met or I have come across. So I think it's very cathartic, and it is a pleasure for my own self to write something which comes so naturally, and it comes very effortlessly to write about people that you know. So it's definitely a very pleasurable experience for the writer. How to make it pleasurable and interesting for the reader is something which needs to be worked upon. So to that extent, I would not really call my book historical, because it's not too far back in the past. It is not against some major event of history which people will immediately correlate to. Like if somebody writes against, let us say, against the Indian War of Independence or the Quit India movement or something, it immediately brings to your mind something which you have read in your textbook. To that extent, this book of mine, this novel of mine, is not a historical book. But yes, it belongs to the past. So, yeah.
Okay. Interestingly, Mr. David Davidar has his first novel called The House of Blue Mangoes, and yours is the second book I have heard about the mangoes. And now, Chirashree, tell me your experience of, you took almost 2 years to translate this novel. As a translator, how was your experience?
It's an wonderful experience. Yes, I took almost 2 years to complete the job, but the translation was over within 1 year. This is all proofreading and all those related jobs which was multitasking on my part. Anyway, I am happy that the book is published. I am grateful to the publisher, and I miss Namita ji here.
We all missed.
Yes. Anyway, she will be happy. She has already sent me so many messages that I am terribly sorry for not being present here. Anyway, the question was, how was the experience, I think. So,
what was your experience while translating?
Translation, I have already told. Translation is always a demanding job. You have to find out the exact terms, exact verbs, the exact feelings, and the phrases, the proverbs. So that must be fulfilling. That must be accurate. Otherwise, the reader will miss. He or she cannot enjoy the exact flavor of the book. So when I decided to translate that book, I read it multiple times, and the book is historical. It includes mutiny, resistance, death, natural calamity, confusions, caste system, women issues, problems of caste hierarchy in India, the very soft, very lucid things. So many variety of characters are there, like Mary Jane, Kaumudi, small characters like Govinda also. Okay. They create an atmosphere in which you have to be submerged, you have to be very sincere, very sincere to maintain that the ideas, the ethnicity.
You have to live that life as if.
So you have to live that life to bring the essence of the novel into our own language. So it was a wonderful experience. I enjoyed it.
Okay. Madam, one thing I was thinking that I am a an avid admirer of Namita Gokhale's novel, because I have read and co-translated her novel called Shakuntala, which she has written taking a challenge of Hermann Hesse Siddharth. That is the female counterpart character. And Shakuntala is an amazing novel. Simultaneously, if you look into the novels of Namita ji, most of the characters are women and very well, not written, I should say that is painted, very well painted characters. And is it, do you think that she is an woman for which she is delving into the characters so easily? You are also a writer, novelist of repute. How do you look at it?
It's a very interesting question, because definitely you're within your comfort zone when you write about things that you are familiar with. So I'm sure that I can speak for myself, and I hope others will agree that it is easier to write about your gender, about your, like what Chirashree madam just now said, that when she was translating the novel of Namita ji set in the mountains and the Himalayas and the Kumaon region, how do you bring that essence and that feeling into an Odia context? So there are small nuances which make things regional, or there are small cultural things which very easily somebody from that part can identify and somebody from here will not identify, and vice versa. So similarly, I think when an author sits down to write, it's easy for Namita ji to maybe delve into the psyche of a woman based in the hills, coming from a certain background. Just as it was easy for me to write about Amnagri because I have grown up there with mangoes, the fragrance of the mango flower, or the kind of atmosphere, the people, or the way people speak. Just as I'm sure it's easy for you to write about poetry set in Bhubaneswar or Kalinga or Konark or Puri. So there are all these nuances. So it is definitely easy for me personally, and I hope it is easy, I assume it is easy for some others, when you write about your own cultural context. But Manuji, when my first short stories came out, it had stories set in Odisha, it had stories set in Assam, and it had stories set in UP. The three places that, or Delhi, the three places that or the four places that I'm familiar with. And one of the interesting feedbacks or remarks that I got from somebody who reviewed the book was that you wrote within your comfort zone. You didn't step out. And I said, yes, you are right. So the person said that, so in your next book, you should attempt to step out. I said, okay, I mean, I'll try, but why do I need to? If I write well within my comfort zone, why do I need to step out? So the person said, no, if you want to, prove your capacity as an author, you need to step out of your comfort zone. I don't agree with him entirely or disagree with him, because greats like Devidarji was mentioning before this, Chekhov wrote about the society that they saw. Tagore or Sharat Chandra Chattopadhyay or your own wonderful Oriya authors, Gopinath Mohanty ji, they all wrote about their own cultural milieu and their cultural context. So I don't measure the capacity to write about something which you don't know as a mark of greatness or a sign of greatness. But I did try in my second novel to keep the protagonist as a non-woman also. I thought, why should it be only the voice of the woman which speaks in my book? There are men who are equally integral to the story. So I made a conscious effort to give a voice to the male characters who, otherwise like Namita ji's book, I used to generally put on the sidelines, at least in my first set of short stories, they were all sitting on the sidelines watching the women do all the action and do all the main things. So in my second book, I tried And I think I succeeded fairly well because people were confused and people would always ask me when I did readings or when I spoke about my book that who is the protagonist of your book? And if I asked them back, who do you think is the protagonist? I got back different answers. Somebody said A, somebody said B. So I thought I had succeeded in making it not a unilinear voice. But to come back to your original question, it is definitely easier to write about your own gender and about your own setting.
Thank you. I'll give you some space to, no, it's okay. Now, Chirashree, you have translated this into Oriya, but in the other way, why an Oriya person, reader, will read this novel? Do you have thought, given any thought about it?
Language may differ, but feelings, particularly in India, in every region, somehow match with each other. Things are pan-Indian, I think. So, why should an Odia reader read this book? If this is the question, then why should not the Odia reader read more, know more, explore more, imagine more, and know more? The novel, Things to Leave Behind, it is the third book of a trilogy. Madam has already mentioned that book, or Manu Dash, that is Shakuntala, the Mountain Echoes, and books like that. Those books portray the beauty, the serenity of Himalayan range. But this book, particularly the book I have already translated, it depicts so many things I have already told. In spite of the 50 years it covers, it begins in a Puranic time, and it shows the protagonist is Tilottama, Tili, her struggle, her fragile daughter Devaki, how she her metamorphosis into a strong, bold and decisive woman. But apart from those things, there are so many minor characters, so many minor incidents, actually, which fulfill the entire landscape. An Odia reader can see the same caste hierarchy, the sorrows of the marginalized class, the struggle of survival for the plant and animal world, the strength to fight against the odd things of life, to overcome the situations which are always unwelcoming. So we can see our own image in that book. We can, though the cultural differences there, as Madam has already told in a very beautiful way, that the cultural base of UP, the Aam Bagan, the mango group, is not here in Odisha. So we cannot imagine the pine forest, the Himalayan range, the nights filled with the windy, the icy wind. So these things are not there. But the basic human emotion is same here. There are certain social problems which are still here. That's why an Odia reader can enjoy the book and can enrich himself by reading the book.
Thank you. Now you also told, and I have also told about the translation of Shakuntala by us, me and by one of my co-translators, Sitanatha Mishra, into Odia. Now it comes about the, it is the last novel of that trilogy, that Things to Leave Behind. It is the last of the trilogy. Ma'am, what is your take on about the trilogy?
It is again a very difficult task to write interconnected books and writing is one part of it, but to make it interesting for the reader to wait for the second book. I think one of the finest examples is J.K. Rowling and her Harry Potter series, wherein we saw queues of people waiting outside bookstores to
Amitav
buy
Ghosh.
Amitav Ghosh. Then recently again Amish Tripathi's the Ramayana series. So there have been very, very successful attempts at creating interrelated sequential sets of books. In this case, what I find interesting, which Namita ji has very successfully done, is while the books have a common thread, they are also standalone books. Yes. So if you read the Things to Leave Behind and you have not read the previous Mountain Echoes, it doesn't matter. I mean, it's not as if you need to read that to know this. So it's a very delicate balancing act, and it requires a lot of effort. So I think full marks to her and a lot of appreciation for her that she managed to retain that link.
Okay, thank you. My next question to you, ma'am, is in this Things to Leave Behind, when you have read, what are the important scene or character that caught your attention?
There were many, many memorable scenes, but I will make a mention of a few. One is when the British take over the ownership of Nainital. So it belongs to somebody called, I think, Narsingh Thokdar. If I'm pronouncing the name correct, Narsingh Thokdar. He is a local zamidar or a local landlord, and it falls under him. And one fine day, the British come and they go for boat ride in Naini Lake. This is the first time that a boat is being launched in its sacred water, so there's a big crowd. And when Narsingh Thokdar is invited to join the British officers in the boat, he feels very privileged and very powerful suddenly that he's got this special boat ride. But in the middle of the Naini Lake, they take him, he can't swim, and they tell him that either you sign off and give us this area, or we will just put you in the water, and you anyway can't swim, so it's certain death for you. I found that scene very remarkable because Namita ji has written it in a very flat and unemotional manner. And she says that Thokdar did a quick calculation and he kept quiet. He didn't know, he decided that life was more important. But somewhere I felt it was a very poignant scene for me on how people were arm twisted or how people were exploited and coerced into giving up something. I'm not justifying Thokdar's existence. He may have been equally, should I say, exploitative of his the farmers and his community, but the fact that he was defrauded, and by fraud and by coercion he had to give up something which had belonged to his family for generations. That is one scene which comes to my mind. And the second is when Devi Dutt Pant calls an astrologer for Tilotma's marriage, and the guy says that her horoscope has a in North we call it Mangalik. I don't know, Orissa, yes, there must be, yeah, Mangalik. So marry her to a peepal tree or a banana tree, and then we uproot the plant and throw it away so that her husband's life is safe. And he's aghast, and he says, we live in modern times. So this is 1859 or 60 maybe, and he's talking in that language. But today also, in many parts of India, we do believe in Manglik. And if an astrologer gives that advice, I'll say at least 40% of us would listen to it, if not follow it completely. And there would be a section of us who would be equally aghast and say, what nonsense are you talking about? We live in modern times. This is non-scientific. So I found that marriage between the past and the present so touching, and it made me think a lot.
Thank you. My next question again to you, that you told that Namita has written about these novels, where she is quite rooted. Kumaon Hills, she was born there, all these things, we are aware of it. So also in your case, the Amnagri, Awasthis of Amnagri, you also now told that you were grown up with the the mango smells of mangoes, all these things. Why writers always dwell upon their origins, roots. What is the real reason? Why they want to return to their origins time and again? Is there any specific reason?
I think, Manuji, you are very fortunate that you are living in the place where you were born. Neither Namita ji nor I have had that good fortune. So this urge to go back to your roots is something which you can pretend is not there, but it is so deep-rooted, it cannot be explained. And there is something which pulls you back, and if you can't go physically, you try and go mentally through your books. And when we were kids studying in school, we would read all these Sanskrit shlok, or Janani Janbhumishch Gariyasi, and that time you just read Janbhumi and you were like, yeah, Janbhumi. But as you age, yes, there is a Karmbhumi, and there is an equally strong pull from your Janbhumi, whether you can go back or not. So Namita, I think, could never go back, and that is where you see she has brought what is hers in this book to herself.
Okay. My last question also again to you, because I have already done with Chirashree, that this novel, which we are talking about, the things to leave behind, it has a lot of characters. And Namita ji has a beauty that when she describes the mountains, you feel like as if you are also passing through that mountain, and you are in the thick forest sometimes, even if I have experienced while translating that Shakuntala. See, if you include the minor ones, do you think a reader, you enjoy having many characters in a novel?
What do you think? Do you enjoy reading a novel with many characters?
You see.
I'll tell you then what I think. Yeah.
Yes, I do, but I always keep, if you ask me Shakuntala, then I know, I remember 2-3 characters, protagonist, Shakuntala, and her mother, and the fellow with whom she has gone and made her life. Few characters, not much.
Personally, I get very confused if a novel has too many characters, who is what, where, correlation. And this used to happen in in a lot of classic novels, thick ones, War and Peace, or any of the classics that you pick up, Gone with the Wind, you'll find that there are multiple characters, and sometimes it's very exciting and sometimes it's very difficult to keep track of all of them. But definitely as a writer, it is a humongous task to populate your work with many characters, to give each of them a voice so that they don't look like just decoration pieces, and yet not to lose the focus from your main story, which is what she has done very, very remarkably. So people come in, people go out, you read about them, somewhere they register, so you don't forget, like even this Thokdar, the character of that Zamidar, it made an impact, and I remember the name, though I read this maybe 15 days back, because somewhere it makes an impact on you. But at the same time, as a reader, I don't like too many characters. As an author, I realize that some characters are needed to fill up the voids, and because it is such a difficult task, I always maintain a family tree or some kind of a chart that who is what, and I keep going back so that I don't make up mistakes with names when I'm writing.
Thank you. I'll just take it pat came to my mind about so many characters. Even if, let us not talk about, besides this War and Peace, the very slim novel of Marquez, Death of a Chronicle of a Death Foretold, it is hardly 100 pages book, but there are 52 characters. I have failing to remember the character's name while reading. I took a lot of time noting down who is whose father, mother, and their relationship. It was so, though yes, it was very beautifully written, it beyond our imagination, but it happens. What I fully corroborate with you. Thank you, madam, for giving your time and speaking so well to the audience. And we are also thankful to Chirashree, in spite of her busy schedule. Like madam also was very, very tight schedule, and she made it. We are grateful. for that. And thank you, Chirashree, coming and giving a very good book to Odia readers. I must, as a publisher, I am proud of you. Thank you, madam, once again. Namaskar.
Thank you so much, all the delegates. As we know that these sessions, thanking all of you for this clarifying and, of course, the personifying these particular issues and things. And the sponsors who organized is mainly by Dhauli Review Trust, as we know, and, of course, an associate sponsor, Indian Oil, and on the same time supported by SAIL and NALCO, Union Bank of India, and OHPC. So thank you once again to all the sponsors for making it more clear reasons about